couple of disclaimers. It's not the usual ones you get from lawyers, which is this is not legal advice and shouldn't be taken to be such. The first disclaimer I'll give is I stepped off a plane from London yesterday morning, so if I appear a little jaded, I feel quite jaded. So that's the first one. I promise if you do win the prize, which is me for a day, I can't wait, and I can't wait to meet some new friends. I will not be so heavily jet lagged. I will be on my A game. So that's the first one. And the second one is the title of this presentation today. So, Modern Slavery Act. It doesn't, maybe it sounds a bit legal, sounds a bit boring. We should put a comma there, really, I think, because a lot of people don't really know what it is and aren't really doing enough. So we should say Modern Slavery Act, which I think is somewhat better, because a lot of people aren't doing anything. And they're not doing anything because they don't really understand it, what it is, or what in fact they need to do, or how they can comply with this legislation and what it needs. So hopefully, over the next 25 minutes, I will help to explain to you a whole lot of stuff around this legislation. And I've been researching this and working on this actually for a couple of years now. It's been a piece of law in England since 2015, so they passed their Modern Slavery Act. And our act and our legislation over here, the Modern Slavery Act Commonwealth, replicates the UK Act very, very much. So it's almost the same. And so there's a lot of good stuff to draw from the UK. There's a lot of materials being written. There's a lot of modern slavery statements published by businesses above their revenue threshold, which is £36 million, by the way. The revenue threshold here in Australia, if you don't know, is $100 million. But that doesn't mean that if you're under $100 million, it doesn't apply to you. Because you can make it apply to you, or people who do business with you will make it apply to you whether you like it or not, because they might stop doing business with you unless you do something about it. So it's going to apply to everybody, and already applies to a whole lot of people. Now, there's a good image up here, which is one of my favourite images in this space, which is all about basically the commoditisation, I suppose, of human beings, which is really what modern slavery is. And people sort of say to me, well, what exactly is modern slavery? And uniquely, the Australian law has defined it. So the English law doesn't define what modern slavery is. The Australian law does, which is really good. So we have a definition of modern slavery here in Australia, which goes through about 7 or 8 things which constitute modern slavery, because people don't really know exactly what it is, and you're to be forgiven for that. The other thing that I like to do about this topic is to give it a sort of home. So where does modern slavery live? Because it's kind of come out of nowhere, but now it's something that a lot of people are talking about, and it's very high on the agenda for boards and board meetings around Australia, as it should be, because it has the potential to cause catastrophic damage to a company's reputation, and also may come with some heavy fines if the New South Wales legislation gets up. And I should say the introduction was great. I do work not just with New South Wales councils, but councils all around Australia and everywhere. So I'm head of procurement nationally, which takes me to every state, territory and place that you can imagine, talking about things like this. So where does modern slavery live? I've been doing procurement for a very, very long time, and those of you that know me know that I love procurement. That's one of my favourite things, actually. And I've been doing it for about 20 years. And when I started, as we heard earlier on from the gentleman from the Victorian government, it was all about buy cheapest, really. So let's just get the cheapest thing that we can. If it fits our bill, let's just buy that. And that's where people focus. And increasingly, people are getting more and more interested in and paying more attention to sustainable procurement, which is very important. And so sustainable procurement went on a bit of a journey, culminating in the international standard on sustainable procurement, which is ISO 20400:2017. So 2 years ago, we had the finalisation, the publication of the international standard on sustainable procurement, ISO 20400. And if you haven't seen that, or you haven't got that, or you're not aware of that, then it's a very good thing, actually. And it talks about what sustainable procurement is, put some definitions forward about sustainable procurement, and recognises really that sustainable procurement fits into 3 boxes. As we heard earlier on, again from the gentleman from the Victorian government here, he talked about the recognition of the economics of procurement, so that's the financials, that's profit, that's fine. It's a box out of 3. Then the environmental, also very important, and we just heard a whole lot of things that people are doing in that area, particularly the airlines, which is great, reduction of waste, buying better and smarter, and more recognition of the environment. And lastly, social. That's homeless, that's indigenous, that's social enterprises, and it's modern slavery. So modern slavery sort of lives underneath the 3rd tier of sustainable procurement. So look, procurement, economic, environmental and social, and within social we've got modern slavery. So it's a subset really of what has become a large groundswell of sustainable procurement, but that's where it lives. But all of a sudden it's sprungboard or elevated itself well above sustainable procurement or anywhere else because, frankly, sustainable procurement is and has been a nice to have in terms of people's minds. That's a really good thing for organisations and corporates to have, is sustainable procurement, and to have all these policies and marketing material around that. All of a sudden, we've got a law that requires businesses to comply with a thing called modern slavery, so that's why it's elevated itself above everything else, because there's a law about it. Once there's a law about something, organisations, and particularly directors, tend to get quite stressed, and they want to make sure they comply with it as they should. So that's sort of giving modern slavery a home. How are we defining modern slavery here in Australia? This is how we define it. There are 8 forms of modern slavery. Slavery, servitude and forced marriage. People trafficking, forced labour, deceptive recruiting, debt bondage. And lastly, the worst forms of child labour. And that one always gets people thinking too. So does that mean that the other forms of child labour are okay? So, and it's kind of an interesting thing really. Like when I get my son to clean my car on the weekend, in a way that's child labour, but it's not the worst forms of child labour, so I can still do it. It's when I beat it when he doesn't do it, that's where it becomes modern slavery. Now in terms of businesses, the things that you would tend to find most in your own supply chain or your own organisation are the ones on the top right-hand side there: forced labour, deceptive recruiting, debt bondage, those three. Those three are very much aligned with that. And it's interesting to get some statistics around this as well. So some statistics that are both alarming and interesting are: how many modern slaves are there in the world? 40.3 million. Now, and again, these are all guesstimates from those, some very reliable sources. The International Labour Organization, the ILO, publishes a report every 2 years, and this is from their most recent report, these figures. But they are guesstimates, and they're probably underestimates, because it's not like people put in annual reports when they're involved in organised crime, and that's what modern slavery is, it's organised crime. And so we get these statistics really by extrapolating from federal police and other organisations. So there's 40.3 million individuals affected globally. There are $150 billion worth of profits generated by modern slavery globally. Now that was an organisation, that is larger than a lot of countries' gross domestic product. That is an enormous amount of money generated from this. And lastly, how many have we got here in Australia? How many modern slaves do we actually have on our doorstep? And we'd like to think none, but it's not true. There are at least 15,000, at least 15,000, and they are in, and we would all engage with them, not knowingly. They're in our local restaurants, they're in our nail bars, although I've checked, my nail bar doesn't have any. They are in massage parlours, and they're obviously in brothels and places like that. That's where they are, and they are all affected by modern slavery. So we engage with them. The Home Affairs Deputy Minister thinks that most Australians would have an interaction with a modern slave locally at least every fortnight. So that's quite alarming. So, what is it and what isn't it? So we've got a definition of it there. Other people then say, well, what about this? Is it, if I don't pay people properly, are they modern slaves? If I don't provide them with safe working conditions or personal protective equipment that they are required to have by law, is that modern slavery? And the answer is no. It's not. And the answer also is there are laws about those things. There's the Fair Work Act, and there's the Work Health and Safety legislation, or the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So we've got laws that deal with those things. Obviously they are unlawful and they shouldn't occur, but it's not modern slavery. For it to be modern slavery, it has to be on the far left. There has to be some elements of physical or mental coercion, threat, violence, that kind of thing, and that's where it becomes modern slavery. So, we've got two pieces of legislation here, New South Wales and Commonwealth. The New South Wales legislation was the first in Australia. It was passed in 21st of June. It was expected to come in 1 July, just gone, but it hasn't. It's been referred to a committee on social issues at the moment because of some significant jurisdictional constitutional issues between the Commonwealth legislation and the New South Wales legislation. Before you all fall asleep, because this is like the most boring thing in the world, the constitutional aspects of Australian law, it is an issue for us in Australia, is that we're over-regulated, we've got states, territories, all with different acts and so on, and a Commonwealth, and why do we do that, and is it really necessary? It's a massive cost of business, etc. So, frankly, I'd be happy for it to fall away, provided that it fills the gaps and improves, that the Commonwealth legislation is improved, where the New South Wales legislation is better. It was better in a number of respects. So we've got Commonwealth legislation, and this is relevant, it applies nationally, and it was assented in December 2018 and commenced 1st of January this year. And so it's up and running. Unlike the New South Wales Act, which whilst it's been passed into law is just currently on ice, this is up and running. And there are some great documents around the place. One of the best that I've seen is this guidance for reporting entities, released by the Department of Home Affairs here, the draft guidance for reporting entities. So if you're in charge of modern slavery in your organisation, or you're interested in it, then you should read that, because it's the best thing available at the moment for modern slavery. Okay, I'll go with that. So, where does it cut in? Who does this apply to? The New South Wales Act's jurisdictional limit was $50 million and above. So it said organisations with 50 million plus, they must comply with the legislation. Commonwealth has put it at $100 million plus. A couple of quick questions, which maybe you're asking via the app, I hope you're getting lots in, but a couple of quick questions I'm often asked about that is, well, what does that mean? Who does that apply to? Is that a single entity or group? And the answer is it's the group. So it is an organisation and all of its subsidiaries taken together under the financial standards, the Accounting Standard 10, Australian Accounting Standard 10, AAS 10 for the accountants in the room is what you look to for consolidated group reporting $100 million or more a year in. So that's who it applies to. Government, it applies to government as well. It applies to Commonwealth Government, definitely. The New South Wales legislation absolutely made it apply to state and local governments in New South Wales, but that's been put on ice. There are some reasonably interesting and large question marks about the application of the Commonwealth legislation to state and local governments around the country. And we haven't yet got an answer for that, although it seems to be, seeing as some of the advices that I've been asked to give lately on this, and the assistance that local councils around the country are asking us to give them, it seems to be that local councils are going to be caught by this, if their revenue is over $100 million. And you say, well, what's revenue? If we say that rates are revenue, and this is what's out there, and the accountants have asked the question about this actually to the Department of Home Affairs, then definitely all local councils will be captured by this all over the country. So that's an interesting issue. The other issue though is even if you're not absolutely caught by this, then it's a good thing to be doing as well. So there's that as well. So you can agonise yourself to death saying, God, I hope it doesn't apply to me. Or you can say, you know what, I'm going to make it apply to me because this is the sort of thing that organisations should be doing anyway. So that's the other thing to say about this is where government entities fit in. All right, what do you have to do? Fundamentally, the legislation is pretty short actually, and all it requires you to do is to, at the end of a reporting period, publish a modern slavery statement, or to send your modern slavery statement actually to the Department of Home Affairs, and they'll publish it for you, and there'll be a link to every single modern slavery statement that is sent to them by reporting entities in the country. You also, I'm sure though, should put it somewhere publicly yourself. So this is one of the differences in New South Wales. You had to publish it in a public place, that is all. You didn't have to send it in to the Anti-Slavery Commissioner, whereas in the Commonwealth, you only have to send it in to the Modern Slavery Anti-Slavery Commissioner through the Department of Home Affairs, but you will also, I would expect you would publish it because you should be proud of the fact that that's what we'll do. And your statement has to tick off 7 criteria. And like I say, the legislation actually only requires you to publish a modern slavery statement, which is telling the world what you're doing about identifying modern slavery in your supply chains. And I'll just briefly be going through these 7 criteria in a second. The other thing that people are doing with modern slavery is, which is not very good, in fact very questionable, is firstly, they're asking organisations to certify that their supply chains are modern slavery free, and actually asking for a statutory declaration to that effect. And there would be very, very few, if any, companies or organisations or entities in the world, let alone Australia, that could actually do that. Because all mobile phones, all computers have got cobalt in them. It's just a rare metal that is mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is the third worst country in the world for modern slavery, and every mine engages in modern slavery, absolutely. And so every bit of cobalt's got modern slavery in it, every computer's got it in it, and so does every mobile phone. So no organisation can say they're modern slavery free because they won't be. And so to ask people to do that is arguably unconscionable, which is unlawful under the Competition and Consumer Act, and you can be fined for that, up to $1 million, or $1.1 million actually. And if somebody certifies that they are, because they want the business, knowing that they're not, then that's misleading deceptive, which is also unlawful, and could lead to a $1.1 million fine. So that's not the approach that should be being taken, is to ask people to falsely certify that they're modern slavery free, because it's impossible. But I have seen it. So don't do that. Now, we'll come to what you should do in a minute, and there's in terms of supplier onboarding questionnaires, tender forms, changes to your contracts, etc. And that's an interesting thing to go through as well, and also updating the policies. There's a few things that we should be doing. At the end of the journey, though, you've got to put up a modern slavery statement, and that modern slavery statement has 7 criteria. The first 2 are all about you. What's the entity? Name, ACN, registered office. What is the entity's structure, operations, and supply chain? So what do you do? How are you structured? What business are you in, and what are basically your supply chains? And that's not identifying all 500 supply chains. It's a general description of supply chains. So electronics, construction, whatever that might be. It's that kind of broad brush description. And can I say a couple of things on a modern slavery statement, because this will all look very frightening, but it doesn't have to be. The modern slavery statements that I've looked at, and I've looked at plenty from the UK, and we've worked on some here already, they range in length from 2 to 20 pages. So we're not talking about a 100-page nightmare here, we're talking about something that can actually be quite simple. And the thing about this is, like I say, people are over-worrying about it, so they're doing nothing. It's that whole kind of paralysis by analysis thing, trying to analyse it so closely that they end up not doing anything, and that's no good. The other thing to say is, there is one modern slavery statement that's been held up in lights by the UK as a model, a model form, the best of its breed and that kind of thing, which is the one written by Marks and Spencers. So if you want to see a really, really good modern slavery statement from the UK, and like I said, the UK Act and the Australian Act are virtually the same, then having a look at Marks and Spencers is a good place to start. So that's who are you and your operations, etc. I think I might skip that one. 3 is all about risks and modern slavery in the supply chains that you've got. And when we come to looking at what risks are in a supply chain, looking at it in a few ways. There's where you yourselves are causing modern slavery, where you contribute to it, or where you're just directly linked to it. So, causing it is where you are doing it yourself. If you own a factory and your employees are basically modern slaves, then that's one tier. Another one is where you contribute to modern slavery, which is where it's in your contracts. It's usually the first layer. So directly with your contractors, you're contributing to modern slavery. Also, if you're asking them to do things which can only be done by abusing their workforce, then clearly you're contributing to modern slavery as well. And then there's that direct linking through operations, products, electronics. So there's a link to it, but you're not actively that involved. So there's a few different layers. And that's another question that I get a lot from organisations, is how far down the supply chain do I have to go? And that is a very interesting question. And like all questions with legal things, there is no answer. In fact, the only answer is that you only get is, oh, well, it depends, which is very unhelpful, I know. But that's kind of what you get. And the guidelines on modern slavery published by the Department of Home Affairs say, we're not going to tell you how far the supply chain you need to go, but what we will say is that going down one layer is not enough. So that's massively unhelpful, I know. The other thing to say, though, is this is a multi-year journey. So it's a piece of law that's come out of nowhere, and no one's expecting you to boil the ocean in 1 year. And so you want to set up a modern slavery action plan, which we're doing with a lot of organisations, which say, look, here's our 4-year approach to this, or 5-year approach. In year 1, we are just going to go down to the first tier, because frankly, we don't think that we're going to get any further than that. But in year 2, we will go beyond that, and we'll go to level 2 or 3 or whatever. So you can take a multi-year approach. Number 4 is the actions. You just describe the actions that you take to assess and address the risks of modern slavery in your supply chain during the 12-month reporting period. And I'll come back to in just a moment when that begins or began. And then a method of assessing the effectiveness of the sanctions taken in terms of modern slavery. So what methods are you using to assess how effective they are? What methods are you using? So that's all it's asking for here, the methodology, rather than asking you to write up how successful or how effective you've been. And there's a different thing. People are misreading that. They're worrying about the fact they have to kind of go into print and substantial print about how effective they've actually been in reducing modern slavery. That's not the case. It's how effective are the actions that you're taking when you assess them. How effective are they? The assessment. They can be both qualitative and quantitative, KPIs, etc. So I'll move on from there as well. Then, still on criteria 5, how can you address these in your statement? Review the actions, check the risks, regularly engage between key areas of your organisation, do internal audits, work with suppliers, partner with industry groups, that's another big one, and then review all your actions. Number 6 won't apply to many people, certainly won't apply to everyone. This is just where you've got a few entities within your structure, so where there's subsidiaries, how you're consulting with them and working with them, so this won't apply to everyone. Like I say, probably won't apply to certainly local councils, I wouldn't think, not all of them anyway. And lastly, number 7 is any other relevant information, so anything else that you might like to say. So that's where you can put in how effective you've actually been if you want to, but there's no requirement to. You can also talk about training that you might be undertaking, and that is certainly part of some of the criteria 4 and 5. You can also talk about engagements and partnerships you might have with NGOs or charities in this space as well. All those things are great things to put into a modern slavery statement under criteria 7. So that's what you need for your modern slavery statement, and the Act, as I say, only really requires you to publish a modern slavery statement. So, when do you have to report? Within 6 months of the end of your entity's reporting period. Now, what is your reporting period? The reporting period is aligned to your financial year. So for most of you, the Australian financial year is 1 July to 30 June, but that's not everyone. Some do a calendar year, and some do a April-March. So Canadian businesses do a 1 April to end March. So it depends on where your business is. Now this is what the Australian thing looks like. If you are an Australian financial year entity, which I'll say most of you will be, the law started here, 1 January. So that's there. The reporting period commenced 1 July 2019. So that was at the beginning of last month. Is the period about which you need to be writing up in your modern slavery statement, which is due 30 December 2020. So you have to have a modern slavery statement published at the end of December 2020, but that will be reporting on the actions that you've taken and the stuff you've done from 1 July 2019 to 30 June 2020. So we're already a month and a half into most organisations' reporting period. And a lot of organisations sort of say, well, what do I need to do and when? And they sort of switch off by this when you say, well, you've got to put up a modern slavery statement by 30 December 2020. They go, oh, that's ages away, that's fine. And they think it's a tomorrow problem. And it's not. And right now, it's not even a today problem, it's very much a yesterday problem. So if this Act applies to you and you haven't started doing anything, then I implore you to start doing something today, or tomorrow, or Monday. So, but just do something soon if it applies to you. And the first thing to do is to work out if it applies to you or not, and then draw up a modern slavery action plan. And then you've got to find people champions as well, and that's a hard thing with this, because there's many people that can champion this. Procurement can champion this, because really it's all about supply chains. It's all about procurement. Supply chains is about buying stuff. So it could be the procurement team, it could be the internal lawyers, if you've got some, it could be internal risk, those sorts of groups. It also needs HR, for HR, for policies and things like that, and the way that you bring people on, and the way that you treat people and pay people. So it needs HR. It needs finance, where you're buying stuff from. What is your supply chain? And how do you work out what your supply chain is anyway? What do you know what you bought? So the place to start there is to press print on your financial reporting system to see what you've spent on who and where, and then work out what it is you bought from them, what sector that's in, and what country that stuff's come from. And that's how you assess modern slavery risk, is the type of product and where it came from in particular, and what sector it's in. Okay, so that's a sort of timeline. That blue period is the reporting period, and there's the statement. You've got 6 months to write it up. I've already said that you have to send it into the Department of Home Affairs, Commonwealth. New South Wales, you just publish it in a public place. Penalties. What happens if you don't do what you're supposed to do? Well, in New South Wales, there's a fine, $1.1 million for not doing a statement when you should have, or for having a statement that contains anything that is misleading or deceptive. And in the Commonwealth, there are no fines, but that doesn't really matter in terms of the impact this can have. If you get written up on the front page of the Sun Herald, for example, for being engaged in modern slavery, that will be much worse than a $1 million fine. It's the sort of thing that ruins councils, ruins businesses overnight. The other thing to say about that is penalties will come, for sure, at the Commonwealth level. The Labor government said that they would introduce penalties if they were elected. They weren't, whatever. But it means that it's very much on the political agenda. The Modern Slavery Act in the UK doesn't have penalties. It's just gone through its 3-year review. And the findings are that it's a big failure not having penalties because people aren't complying with legislation. So that means that the issue of penalties in legislation, particularly this one, is looming large. So there will be penalties. Right, opting in. So people can actively opt in. There's a section that even if you're not $100 million plus, you can say, you know what, I want to be in this. And I think that's a pretty good way to go. Because if you're a supplier, you're going to be asked a whole lot of questions about your modern slavery approach and what you're doing about it. And the first question will be, are you covered by the Act or have you opted in? If yes, stop here. If no, here's 12 or 13 questions that you need to answer. So honestly, I think, like I say, opting in is going to be the easiest approach. Right, last few slides now, and probably some of the more relevant ones, particularly for me, are what you do with your tenders, your supply questionnaires, and your contract clauses. So, let's have a quick look at these tender forms. There's more information now about the supplier that you're going to want to ask. For example, what's the revenue of that organisation and what is its corporate group? Because that will give you the information you need to know about whether or not they are required to or should be complying with the Modern Slavery Act. You also might want to get more information about their corporate policies, because there's a whole lot of policies. We saw some before that organisations have. There was that gentleman from the Gold Coast Council who had loads of policies just on procurement. Well, there's lots of policies that touch on modern slavery. There's the creation of a modern slavery questionnaire, supplier questionnaire, and as possibly a schedule as well in your tender form. So that's some stuff you can put into your tenders. Here's the policies. There's a whole long list of policies there that directly relate to modern slavery. The first one, procurement, purchasing, sourcing, subcontracting, and that might be one policy or it might be 10. Then there's whistleblowing, and there's a change to the whistleblowing legislation just a couple of months ago actually that requires organisations to update their whistleblowing policy. But whistleblowing applies to modern slavery because people need a safe space to report things that are bad, and modern slavery is bad. So whistleblowing is another one. Migrant workers, there is a great prevalence of modern slavery in the migrant community. Human rights, how are we treating people? How do we deal with people? That's human rights. Gender, there are 71% of modern slaves in the world are women. 71%. And obviously that is explained by and large by the prevalence in the sex industry and also forced marriage. So every forced marriage is an example of modern slavery. And so that obviously then lumps up its application to females in that way. So that is somewhat explained there. So gender policy, recruitment, how you keep people on, child labour, child protection, suppliers, employee grievance, human resources. So that's a big list of policies. New additional contract clauses or things to think about. You have warranties in your contracts already. Contracts tend to have warranties. What are they? They're just promises. I promise that, whatever. You want to have a promise that if there's a modern slavery statement that they've got, that they put one in. If they're required to put one in, they have. If they've given you a copy of it, that it is accurate and that they comply with the law or warranty around that, and the information that they have provided you is true and accurate. You want warranties about all of that. Particularly that last one about information they provide being accurate, true, etc., because if anything they tell you is false, in New South Wales, that would lead directly to a $1 million fine. Not Commonwealth. Next, information record keeping. So keep records. You need to require people to keep records so that you can look at where they're buying stuff from. Because that's how you assess modern slavery risk, is what it is, where it's from, what sector it's in, etc. So you need people to keep records for that. You need a clause in your contract that requires them to disclose to you information, because you've got to undergo due diligence. So whenever it is that they're asked, they've got to give you information about their products, where they got it from, etc. So a clause around that. Then an ongoing obligation to report anything they find. An actual example of modern slavery, you'd want to have an obligation to report that to you. And lastly, on this slide anyway, consents allowing you to disclose things and report things. Otherwise, you might find yourself inadvertently breaching confidentiality issues or privacy issues. So a specific consent around that is useful. Next, you want to be able to audit them, either by dropping in, unannounced, interviewing their people, interviewing their workers, having a look at wage slips, making sure they're paying people, having a look at employment contracts, making sure they comply the law, that kind of thing. I should also say, though, that there is a level of proportionality to all of this. So you wouldn't want all of this in your 2-page purchase order, because it'll become a 10-page contract, 8 pages of which are all about modern slavery. So it's not proportionate. This is the kind of gold class stuff that you put into your $50 million project type contract. But just draw from this, though, because you can do all of this in a very short clause or two, and I've done that for purchase orders, but we've also done it to death in much larger contracts as well. So as I say, you've got to be proportionate with these things and appropriate. Next, an obligation to train their suppliers and their employees. Next is an obligation on them to flow down to their subcontractors the stuff that you're putting on them. So it becomes a domino effect, and that's how you get to tier 2 and tier 3. And that's a nice thing to talk about in your modern slavery statement. Next, specific indemnities and limitations, and also focusing on limits of liability. So you want an indemnity from them that if they cause you any damage, reputational or otherwise, or any costs or losses through modern slavery non-compliance, then they indemnify you for that. You want to carve it out of an agreed limit of liability. So if you agree with your supplier that their liability to you is limited to the contract sum, you always carve out from that certain things. Occupational health and safety issues, for example, proceeds of insurance, fraud, third-party IP, or there's a new one. Anything to do with modern slavery, carve that out of the limitation as well. You also want to make sure that if you allow them to have an exclusion of consequential loss, which again, most of you would agree with, often defined within consequential loss is not just loss of profit, loss of use, indirect loss, there is also loss of reputation. And so if you include that within your definition of consequential loss, which you have now excluded from any liability of the contractor, this is all about loss of reputation. So you might find that should you lose through reputational damage because of modern slavery issues draws upon you by a supplier, you actually can't do anything because you've excluded it by excluding your ability to go after them for consequential loss of they've caused, which includes loss of reputation. So you're just going to have a look at that as well. And you'd want to have a termination right as well. So if you find that they are involved in modern slavery and don't care, you probably don't want to do business with them, although the guidelines are very clear that that's not the thing to do straight away. The better thing to do is to train, to educate, to capacity build, and to make the world a better place, not just terminate contract, because they'll just find someone else to do business with and keep doing it. And that's not the answer. That's not what this legislation is intended for. So I know I've got a few minutes over time. Chair, I thought I'd just keep with what everyone else was doing. And I'd love to take some questions.
I mean, where do we start? I feel like we all just got put in the naughty corner to think about what we've done. Okay, so look, there are a few similar questions here, so I'm going to try and merge a couple of them. Why is the reporting only required by companies over 100 million turnover? Why not all organisations?
That's a great question. So England's £36 million, New South Wales 50 billion, Commonwealth's 100 million, so we are highest in that, the Commonwealth. I think not all organisations for two reasons. One is there is a compliance burden to this, and so I guess the government, in recognition of that, has allowed or decided that companies over $100 million really best can do this, can afford to do this, and afford to comply bolus, whereas companies below that may not be able to so much, and they're relying on a bit of a domino effect. And I think also you could answer that by saying why is it that we don't go to open public tender for every single thing? Why is it that it goes usually into financial banks? And the reason is because again it's just disproportionate. So I'd love it to apply to everybody, but the government's taken a decision that putting that regulatory cost and burden on everybody is not the right thing to do.
Okay, I just should mention that we are going to draw the $6,000 consulting prize in a minute. So if you have got a finished passport and you haven't put it in this box, bring it up now while I just ask a couple more questions and put it in this box before Scott draws the winner out. So how do we check that, say on a personal level, our nail bars are staffed not by slaves?
So there's a few indicators for that. There's 4 or 5 great videos from the UK online, 2 or 3 minutes, where they say how to spot modern slavery. One of them is all about nail bars. There's another one in the construction industry, and there's other ones in your takeaway shop and so on. And the way that you can spot it, for example, are people that look afraid, people that won't meet you in the eye or look at you in the eye, people that just appear to be, frankly, enslaved. Also, if they look undernourished, or if they look like they are not getting the medical attention they need, then that's, and also the last indicator is if somebody else, and we all see this, if somebody else comes along who looks just fine, well nourished, overweight, and she's the one taking the money, whereas the poor girl there who's doing your nails never sees money and won't look you in the eye, then it's likely she's a modern slave.
Okay, so there's a few questions about sort of the hospitality industry, and we've all experienced, we all know a barista or a waiter or someone's getting paid cash and that sort of thing. This one probably covers it. Is the George Columbaris wage theft issue considered modern slavery?
No, not unless they are. He said anything to them like, if you resign, then I know you live. That kind of, when people do that. So, but if he or his organisation says done anything like that, that's where it becomes modern slavery. 7-Eleven, Uber, or George Columbaris or whatever, that's just theft and it's underpayment, still disgusting, but it's not modern slavery.